Have you ever been so desperate, so hollowed out by hunger and cold, that you would have traded your soul for a single hot meal? And have you ever wondered what happens when the man who offers that meal turns out to be starving too? Not for bread, but for something far harder to find. This is the story of how I found salvation in the arms of a woman I should have sent away, and how her hunger became the feast that saved us both. My name is Josiah Brennan, and in the winter of 1903, I was the loneliest man in the Sawtooth Mountains of Idaho Territory. The snow had come early that year, burying the high passes in drifts taller than a man on horseback by the first week of November. I had watched it fall from the window of my cabin, a structure I had built with my own 2 hands from timber I had felled myself, and I had felt nothing. That was the worst part, I suppose. Not the isolation, not the silence that stretched for days without a single human voice to break it, but the terrible emptiness that had taken up residence in my chest where my heart used to be. I had not spoken to another living soul in 47 days when she appeared. I was chopping wood when I first saw her, a dark shape stumbling through the white curtain of falling snow, moving with the desperate, lurching gait of someone who has pushed their body beyond all reasonable limits. I set down my axe and watched her come, my breath pluming in the frozen air, my hands still gripping the worn wooden handle out of habit rather than intention. She was still 100 yards away when she fell. I should explain what I was before I tell you what happened next. I was not a kind man in those days. I was not a gentleman. I was 35 years old, and I had spent the last 7 of those years alone in these mountains, working my silver claim and avoiding the company of other humans with the same dedication most men reserve for avoiding rattlesnakes. The folks down in the mining town of Stanley, a rough collection of saloons, assay offices, and general stores huddled in the valley below, they called me the Bear of Brennan Ridge. Some said I had killed men. Some said I had gone mad from solitude. Some said I kept company with spirits and demons in my lonely cabin. The truth was simpler and sadder than any of their stories. I was just a man who had loved once, lost everything, and decided that the only way to survive was to feel nothing at all. I stood 6 feet and 7 inches tall in my stocking feet, and I weighed 280 pounds of solid muscle and bone. My shoulders were broad enough to block a doorway, my hands large enough to palm a man's skull, and my arms thick as young oak trees from years of swinging a pickaxe and wrestling ore from the mountain's stubborn grip. My face was weathered and hard, my jaw covered in a thick black beard that I trimmed with a hunting knife when it grew too wild. And my eyes. People had told me my eyes were the color of winter ice, pale and cold and utterly without warmth. I had cultivated that coldness deliberately. It kept people away, and keeping people away was the only way I knew to survive. But when she fell face first into the snow and did not move, something cracked inside me. Something I had thought was dead, stirred and stretched, and demanded that I act. I covered the distance between us in long, ground-eating strides, my boots crunching through the frozen crust with each step. She was a small thing I saw as I knelt beside her, barely 5 feet tall and thin as a willow switch beneath the worn wool coat that was far too light for this weather. Her face was turned to the side, and I could see that her lips had gone blue, her cheeks raw and red from the wind, her eyelashes frosted with tiny crystals of ice. She was young, perhaps 23 or 24, with hair the color of dark honey that had escaped from beneath a pitiful excuse for a bonnet and now lay tangled and wet across the snow. She was dying. Even I, who had avoided human contact for so long, could recognize that. I scooped her up in my arms without a second thought, and the lightness of her shocked me. She weighed nothing, less than a sack of flour, less than the haunch of elk I had carried down from the ridge last week. Her head lolled against my chest, and she made a small sound, a whimper like a wounded animal, that did something terrible to my insides. I carried her back to my cabin at a near run, kicked open the door, and laid her on my bed before the fire. The next hours were a blur of activity. I stripped off her wet clothing with hands that shook from something other than cold, wrapped her in every blanket and fur I owned, built the fire until it roared like a living thing, and forced spoonfuls of warm broth between her cracked lips. She drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes moaning, sometimes whispering words I could not understand, and I sat beside her through it all, watching her face for any sign that she might slip away from me. It was dawn before her fever broke. I had fallen asleep in my chair, my head hanging forward, my massive frame folded uncomfortably into a piece of furniture that was too small for me even when I was trying to fit. The sound of her voice woke me. "Where am I?" I jerked upright, my hand automatically going to the knife at my belt before I remembered myself. She was looking at me with eyes the color of mountain sage, a green so pale it was almost gray, ringed with darker forest around the edges, and there was fear in those eyes. Fear and something else, something that looked almost like defiance. "You are in my cabin," I said. My voice came out rough and strange, rusty from disuse. "On Brennan Ridge, about 8 miles north of Stanley." She struggled to sit up, and I watched her take in her surroundings, the log walls chinked with mud and moss, the rough-hewn furniture, the animal pelts stretched on frames near the fire, the mining tools stacked in the corner. Her gaze traveled over the single room and finally came to rest on me, and I saw her eyes widen as she registered my size. "You are the one they call the bear," she said. It was not a question. "Some call me that. They say you are dangerous. They say you have killed men." I considered lying, but something about those clear, pale eyes demanded honesty. "I have killed men, 3 of them. They were claim jumpers who thought they could take what was mine. I gave them the chance to leave. They did not take it." She should have been terrified. Any sensible woman would have been terrified, waking up half-naked in the cabin of a giant who had just admitted to killing people. Instead, she simply nodded, as if this confirmed something she had already suspected, and sank back against the pillows. "Then we are both dangerous," she said quietly. "I have killed a man too. That is why I am here. That is why I am running." I did not know what to say to that. I had expected tears, hysteria, demands to be returned to civilization. I had not expected this quiet admission of violence from a creature who looked like she could be snapped in half by a strong wind. "Are you hungry?" I finally asked, because it was the only thing I could think to say. She laughed at that, a short, bitter sound that held no humor. "I have been hungry for 6 weeks. I cannot remember what it feels like not to be hungry." I rose and went to the stove, where a pot of venison stew still simmered from the night before. I ladled a generous portion into a wooden bowl and brought it to her, along with a thick slice of bread I had baked myself 3 days prior. She took the bowl with hands that trembled, and I watched her eat, watched her force herself to take small, measured bites when every instinct must have been screaming at her to devour it all at once. She was smart, this woman. She knew that a starving body could not handle too much food too quickly. She knew how to survive. When she had finished, she set the bowl aside and looked at me with those unreadable pale eyes. "Thank you," she said. "I know you did not have to save me. The smart thing would have been to let me die in the snow. I am not a smart man. No, you are a kind one, no matter what the people in town say." Something twisted in my chest at her words. Kind. No one had called me kind in 7 years. No one had called me anything but monster, bear, devil, hermit. I did not know how to respond, so I said nothing. "My name is Clara," she said after a moment. "Clara Whitfield. Though I suppose that name is worthless now. The law knows it. The man I killed, his family knows it. Everyone who wants me dead knows it. Who was he? The man you killed? Her jaw tightened, and for a moment I saw something flash in those pale eyes, something hot and fierce and utterly unrepentant. He was my husband. Or the man who called himself my husband, though he bought me from my father like a prize heifer and treated me worse than any animal deserves. He beat me for 3 years. 3 years of broken bones and black eyes and silent screaming, because I learned early that making noise only made it worse. And one night, when he came to me with that look in his eyes, that look that meant pain was coming, I picked up the iron poker from the fireplace and I hit him. I hit him until he stopped moving, and then I ran. She told me this in a flat, matter-of-fact tone, as if she were describing the weather, but I saw her hands, saw the way they clenched the blanket until her knuckles went white, and I understood that the flatness was a shield, a wall she had built to keep herself from falling apart. I knew something about walls. "You did right," I said. The words came out gruffer than I intended, but I meant them. Any man who raises his hand to a woman deserves what he gets. Her eyes widened slightly, as if she had expected condemnation and received absolution instead. "The law does not agree with you. His father is a judge in Boise. His brothers are lawyers. They have put a bounty on my head. $500, dead or alive. That is why I was running through these mountains in the middle of a blizzard. That is why I will have to keep running as soon as I am strong enough. That is why you are not going anywhere." The words left my mouth before I could stop them, and I saw her flinch, saw fear flash across her face again. I realized how it must have sounded. A command from a giant who had just admitted to killing 3 men. I tried to soften it. "What I mean is, the passes are snowed in. They will be closed until April at the earliest. Even if you wanted to run, you could not get off this mountain without dying in the attempt." She was silent for a long moment, processing this. "Then I am trapped here, with you." "Yes. And what does that mean for me? What do you expect in return for saving my life, for feeding me, for keeping me from the cold?" There it was. The question I had been expecting since the moment I found her in the snow. The question that hung between us like a living thing, heavy with implication. I could see in her eyes that she had already assumed the worst, that she was already bracing herself for demands she found repulsive, but necessary. She had been bought and sold before. She expected the same from me. I should have reassured her. I should have told her I wanted nothing, expected nothing, would never touch her without invitation. That was what a decent man would have done, but I was not a decent man. I was a man who had been alone for 7 years, a man who had forgotten what it felt like to touch another human being, a man who looked at this fierce, fragile creature and felt something stir in the dead ashes of his heart. I was a man who was starving, though not for food. "I will make you a bargain," I heard myself say. "I will give you everything I have. Food, shelter, protection. I will keep you safe from the law and from the cold and from every threat this mountain can throw at you. And in return—" I paused, aware that I was about to cross a line I could not uncross. But the words would not stay inside. They clawed their way out of my throat like prisoners escaping a cell. "You are hungry for food," I said. "I'm hungry for something else. I am hungry for warmth, for touch, for the feeling of another body beside mine in the dark. I have not been touched by another human being in 7 years, Clara. 7 years of cold beds and colder nights. You need food. I will give you all you can eat, but I need love. And if you make love to me, I will feed you every day until the snows melt, and you are free to go." The words hung in the air between us, ugly and raw and honest. I watched her face, watched the emotions chase across it. Shock, disgust, calculation, resignation. I waited for her to spit in my face, to call me a monster, to confirm everything the people in Stanley believed about me. Instead, she did something that broke me entirely. She laughed. It was not a bitter laugh this time, nor a frightened one. It was a sound of genuine, startled amusement, and it transformed her face from something merely pretty into something radiant. "You are the strangest man I have ever met," she said, when she had caught her breath. "I expected threats. I expected force. I expected a brute who would take what he wanted and call it his due. Instead, you ask. You bargain. You make a deal like a merchant at a market, and the goods you request are—" She shook her head, still smiling. "Love. You ask for love." "I know it is not," I began, but she held up a hand to stop me. "I am not mocking you. I am simply surprised. My husband never asked for anything. He took. He demanded. He broke me when I resisted and broke me again when I complied. The idea that a man might ask for love, as if it were something I had the power to give or withhold." She paused, and I saw something shift in her pale eyes. Something that might have been hope. "You are not asking me to let you use my body. You are asking me to give you something of myself." Yes, I suppose I am." She was quiet for a long moment, studying me with an intensity that made me want to look away. I held her gaze instead, letting her see whatever she needed to see. I was not ashamed of my desire. I was not ashamed of my loneliness. I was only ashamed of the clumsy way I had expressed it. "I will make you a counterbargain," she finally said. "I will stay here through the winter. I will share your bed and your table. I will give you what warmth I can, and I will take what warmth you offer. But I will not pretend to love you if I do not. I will not fake what I do not feel. If love comes, real love, not the counterfeit version I was taught to perform for my husband, then you will have it. But if it does not, then we will part as honest strangers when the path is clear. Is that acceptable?" It was more than acceptable. It was more than I deserved. "Yes," I said, "that is acceptable." And that was how Clara Whitfield came to live in my cabin on Brennan Ridge. And that was how I, Josiah Brennan, the bear of the sawtooths, the monster of the mountains, learned that I was capable of something more than mere survival. The first weeks were awkward, as might be expected when two strangers with violent pasts and broken hearts are trapped together in a single-room cabin while the winter winds howl outside. Clara was weak from her ordeal, and I spent most of my time feeding her, tending to the frostbitten patches on her fingers and toes, and making sure she did not push herself too quickly. She slept a great deal, her body demanding the rest it had been denied for 6 weeks of desperate flight, and I watched over her while she dreamed. She talked in her sleep sometimes, cried out in terror, thrashed against invisible hands, begged someone to stop. I learned to wake her gently during these episodes, to speak in low, soothing tones, until the nightmare released its grip. She never spoke of these dreams in the morning, and I never asked. We all have demons. Some of us just scream at them in our sleep. By the 3rd week, she was strong enough to move about the cabin, and she began to make herself useful in small ways, mending my shirts, which had been patched so many times they were more patch than shirt, stirring the stew while I was out checking my trap lines, sweeping the floor with a broom she fashioned from pine branches. I told her she did not need to work, that I had made no demands beyond what we had agreed. But she fixed me with those pale eyes and said that idleness would drive her mad faster than any threat the mountains could muster. We fell into a rhythm, she and I. I would rise before dawn to tend the fire and check the weather, and she would be awake by the time I returned, brewing coffee in a battered tin pot I had used for years without ever cleaning properly. She taught me that a properly maintained coffee pot made better coffee. It seemed like such a small thing, but it changed the flavor of my mornings entirely. I found myself watching her more than I should. The way she hummed while she worked, some half-remembered melody from a childhood I knew nothing about. The way she bit her lip when she was concentrating on a particularly difficult stitch. the way the firelight caught the honey-gold highlights in her hair when she sat by the hearth in the evenings, reading from the few books I owned. I catalogued every detail like a man memorizing a map to treasure, though I did not yet understand what treasure I was seeking. There was a day in late January. I remember it clearly because the sky had cleared for the first time in weeks, and the sun on the snow was blinding. When I came inside from splitting wood and found her standing by the window, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. She had not heard me enter, and I stood frozen in the doorway, uncertain what to do. In 7 years of solitude, I had forgotten how to comfort another human being. I had forgotten that tears required anything other than distance. But something compelled me to move. I crossed the room and stood behind her, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from her small body. And I said the only thing that came to mind. "What troubles you?" She did not turn. Nothing. Everything. I was watching a bird outside, a junco, hopping through the snow looking for seeds. And I thought, that was me. 6 weeks ago, that was me, hopping through the wilderness, searching for anything that might keep me alive for one more day. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I thought I was going to die, Josiah. I was certain of it. I had made my peace with it. And then you found me, and now I am here, warm and fed and safe, and I do not know what to do with that. I do not know how to live when I had already accepted death. I understood that feeling more than she knew. I had felt it myself 7 years ago, when I had buried my wife and chosen exile over existence. I had lived in that space, between living and dying for so long that it had become familiar, comfortable even. The prospect of actually living, truly living, with all its risks and rewards, was terrifying. "You do not have to know," I said. "Not yet. You just have to wake up each morning and decide to keep going. That is all any of us can do." She turned then, and her tear-streaked face was so beautiful that it hurt to look at. "Is that what you do? Wake up each morning and decide?" "It is what I have done for 7 years, though I confess—" I paused, struggling to find words for something I had never tried to articulate. "It has become easier lately, having someone to decide for." Something flickered in her eyes, surprise perhaps, or something softer. She reached up and touched my face, her small fingers tracing the line of my jaw beneath my beard. "You are a strange man, Josiah Brennan," she said, "but I am beginning to think that strange is exactly what I need." I did not know what to say to that, so I said nothing, but when she turned back to the window, I stayed where I was, standing guard against whatever demons might try to claim her. It was the only protection I knew how to offer. She was beautiful. I had known that from the first moment I saw her in the snow, even through the mask of cold and hunger and desperation. But as the days passed and color returned to her cheeks and strength returned to her limbs, her beauty became something almost painful to witness. She moved through my cabin like a flame through darkness, illuminating corners I had not known were shadowed, warming spaces I had thought were beyond all warmth. I wanted her. God help me, I wanted her with an intensity that frightened me. But I had made a bargain, and I would not break it. I would not touch her until she came to me willingly. I would not take what she was not ready to give. The first night she came to my bed, I was certain I would wake from the dream. We had been sharing a meal by the fire, venison and potatoes and the wild onions I had preserved in salt for the winter, and she had been telling me about her life before her marriage. She had been a schoolteacher in a small town in Oregon, she said. She had loved it. The children, the books, the simple joy of watching a young mind catch fire with understanding. But her father had been a drunkard and a gambler, and when he had lost everything at the card tables, he had sold her to a man twice her age who wanted a young wife to bear him sons. She told me this story without self-pity, as a simple recitation of facts, but I could see the grief beneath the words. I could see the girl she had been, the hopes she had nursed, the future that had been stolen from her. When she finished, I did not know what to say. I was not a man of words. So instead, I reached across the table and covered her hand with mine. My hand was enormous compared to hers, brown and calloused and scarred, swallowing her small, pale fingers entirely. I expected her to flinch, to pull away, to remember all the reasons she should be afraid of me. Instead, she turned her hand over and laced her fingers through mine. And she looked at me with those mountain sage eyes and said, "You are a good man, Josiah Brennan. Whatever you believe about yourself, you are a good man." No one had said those words to me in 7 years. My wife had said them once, in what felt like another lifetime. But she was gone now, taken by the fever that had swept through these mountains in the winter of 1896, and I had buried her goodness along with her body in the frozen ground behind my claim. I had not believed I could be good without her. I had not wanted to try. But Clara was looking at me as if she could see something I had forgotten existed. And God help me, I wanted to be whatever she saw. "Come to bed," she said softly. "It is cold tonight. Let us be warm together." I followed her like a man in a trance. She undressed by the fire, unself-conscious as a doe in a meadow, and I saw the scars her husband had left on her, the twisted pale lines on her back, the faded marks on her ribs, the slight crookedness in her left wrist, where a bone had healed badly. I saw them, and I felt something surge inside me, a rage so hot and pure that I could have ridden through the snow-bound passes on that fury alone and torn her husband's family apart with my bare hands. But he was already dead. She had killed him herself. And that knowledge filled me with a fierce, protective pride that I had no right to feel. I undressed more slowly, aware that my body was a weapon in ways I could not control. But Clara did not look away. She watched me with that measuring gaze, taking in the breadth of my shoulders, the mass of my chest, the sheer impossible size of me compared to her delicate frame. And when I lay down beside her on the bed that had never held anyone but me since my wife's death, she reached for me without hesitation. "Be gentle," she whispered. "I have not known gentleness in a long time." "I do not know if I can be gentle," I admitted. "I have never—" I stopped, embarrassed. "It has been a long time for me as well. My wife—" "Shh." She pressed her fingers to my lips. "We will learn together. We will learn what we can be." And we did learn. That night and all the nights that followed, we mapped each other's bodies like explorers charting unknown territory. I learned where she liked to be touched, the hollow of her throat, the curve of her hip, the soft skin behind her ear. She learned what made me gasp, what made me tremble, what made me bury my face in her hair and forget for blessed moments that I had ever been alone. It was not always graceful. I was too large for her sometimes, and she was too small for me, and we had to find ways to fit together that required patience and creativity. But there was laughter in our learning, and tenderness, and a growing trust that neither of us had expected to feel. I had thought I was offering her a simple transaction, food for warmth, shelter for intimacy. I had not understood that what I was really offering was a chance for both of us to heal. In the mornings after, I would wake before her and lie still, watching the rise and fall of her breathing, counting the freckles across her shoulders that I had never noticed before. She slept deeply now, the haunted restlessness of her first weeks giving way to the profound unconsciousness of someone who finally felt safe. I took pride in that. I took pride in being the reason she could sleep without screaming. One morning, she caught me watching. "You are staring at me," she said without opening her eyes. "I am." "Why?" I considered the question carefully. Because I spent 7 years believing I would never have anyone to look at again. Because you are beautiful, and I am not accustomed to beautiful things. Because I keep expecting to wake up and find that you were a dream. That I am still alone in this cabin, talking to myself and the fire. She opened her eyes then, those pale green depths that seemed to see straight through me. I am not a dream, Josiah. I am very much real. She propped herself up on one elbow, the blankets falling away from her shoulder. And you are not alone anymore. Neither of us is. I know, I said. I know that in my head. But my heart... I struggled to explain something I barely understood myself. My heart has been frozen for so long. It is taking time to thaw. She smiled at that, a small, tender smile that made something crack open in my chest. Then we will thaw it together, day by day, night by night, until all the ice is gone. She reached for me, and I pulled her close, and we lay there in the grey morning light, two broken people slowly learning how to be whole. The winter taught us other things as well. It taught us how to fight. Not with fists or weapons, but with words, with silences, with the small cruelties that people who share close quarters inevitably inflict upon each other. We argued about the fire, about the food, about who should fetch water and who should check the traps. We argued about my tendency to grunt instead of speaking, and about her tendency to ask questions when I wanted only silence. There was one fight in particular that I remember with shame. It was late February, and the walls of the cabin had begun to feel like a prison. Clara said something. I cannot even remember what it was now, and I responded with a harshness that surprised us both. "You do not know what you are talking about," I growled. "You have been here for 3 months. I have lived in these mountains for 7 years. Do not presume to tell me what I may or may not presume," she shot back, her eyes blazing. "I am not your property, Josiah Brennan, and I am not your pet. I am a woman with a mind and a voice, and I will use both whenever I see fit. If that displeases you, then perhaps our arrangement was a mistake after all." The words hit me like a physical blow. I stood there, massive and ridiculous, and I felt something inside me crumble. "Clara," I said. My voice came out small, smaller than I had thought possible for a man of my size. "I am sorry. I did not mean... I know what you meant. You meant to silence me. You meant to remind me of my place." She crossed her arms over her chest, her posture defensive. "My husband used to do the same thing. He was better at it than you are." The comparison to her dead husband was like a knife between my ribs. I sank down onto the nearest chair, my legs suddenly unwilling to support my weight. "I am not him," I said. "I would never. I know you are not him." Her voice softened slightly. "I know you would never raise your hand to me. But there are other ways to make a woman feel small, Josiah. Words can wound as surely as fists." I sat in silence for a long moment, absorbing this truth. She was right. Of course she was right. I had spent so long alone that I had forgotten how to share space with another human being. I had forgotten that my words carried weight, that my moods affected more than just myself. "Teach me," I said finally. "Teach me how to be better. I do not want to hurt you, Clara, not with my hands and not with my words, but I have forgotten." I spread my massive hands in a gesture of helplessness. "I have forgotten how to be a man who deserves to be loved." She studied me for a long moment, and I saw her anger slowly give way to something gentler. She crossed the room and knelt before my chair, taking my hands in hers. "You already deserve to be loved," she said. "You just have to learn how to believe it." We did not argue so fiercely after that. Oh, we still disagreed. Two strong-willed people trapped in a single room through a mountain winter will always find things to disagree about. But we learned to fight fair. We learned to say, "I am angry," instead of saying cruel things. We learned to give each other space when space was needed, and to come together when the space had served its purpose. We learned, in other words, how to be partners, how to be equals, how to be the kind of people who could build a life together. The winter deepened, and we deepened with it. I began to tell her things I had never told another living soul. I told her about my wife, about the fever that had taken her while I held her hand and begged God for mercy that never came. I told her about the 3 men I had killed, about the way their faces sometimes visited me in dreams, even though I knew I had been justified in defending what was mine. I told her about the emptiness that had consumed me in the years since, the way I had hollowed myself out until nothing remained but muscle and instinct and survival. She listened to everything without judgment. And when I was finished, she told me things in return, about the 3 years of her marriage, about the cruelty that had worn her down until she barely recognized herself, about the night she had finally broken free. She told me about the moment the poker had connected with her husband's skull, about the sound it had made, about the terrible satisfaction she had felt when he stopped moving. "I should feel guilty," she said. "I should feel like a monster. But I do not. I feel like I finally, for the first time in 3 years, did something right." I understood that feeling. I understood it better than I could express. "You are not a monster," I told her. "You are a survivor. There is a difference." She smiled at that, one of her rare, radiant smiles that transformed her face into something almost too beautiful to look at directly. "So are you," she said. "We are 2 survivors, you and I. Perhaps that is enough." Perhaps it was. By February, I could no longer pretend that what I felt for Clara was mere desire, or even simple affection. I watched her move about the cabin, and my heart ached with a sweetness I had thought myself incapable of feeling. I listened to her voice as she read aloud from the few books I owned, and I found myself memorizing the cadence of her words, the way she emphasized certain syllables, the slight catch in her breath when she reached a particularly moving passage. I held her in my arms at night, and I knew, with a certainty that terrified me, that I was falling in love with her. I did not speak of it. Our bargain had been clear. She would not pretend to feel what she did not feel. If I declared myself and she did not return my sentiment, I would be forcing her into an impossible position. She could not leave. The passes were still closed, would be closed for months yet. And she would have to spend the remainder of the winter with a man whose heart she had inadvertently broken. I would not put that burden on her. I would carry my love in silence and hope that time and proximity would kindle something similar in her own breast. But keeping silent was harder than I had imagined. Every time she smiled at me, I wanted to tell her. Every time she touched my face with those small, healing hands, the words rose in my throat like floodwaters behind a dam. Every time she whispered my name in the darkness of our bed, I wanted to answer with declarations that would make my devotion clear. I held my tongue, but it was the hardest thing I had ever done. March brought the first thaw, and with it, trouble. I was returning from checking the trap line when I saw the smoke rising from the valley, a thin column of gray that did not belong. There was no settlement in that direction, no claim, nothing but empty wilderness and the old mining road that wound down towards Stanley. Someone had made camp where they had no business being. I shifted the rabbits I had caught to one shoulder and quickened my pace, my instincts screaming that something was wrong. When I reached the cabin, I found Clara standing in the doorway with my rifle in her hands, her face pale and set with determination. "Riders," she said. "3 of them. They came up the road an hour ago. I hid in the root cellar like you showed me, but they stopped at the clearing below and made camp. They are asking questions in town, Josiah. They are asking about a woman." My blood ran cold. Bounty hunters, I said. She nodded, her jaw tight. It has to be. His family has finally tracked me this far. $500 is a great deal of money to men who have none. I took the rifle from her hands and checked the action, my mind racing through possibilities. 3 men against 1 was bad odds, even for me. But I had the advantage of knowing this mountain, knowing every trail and hiding place, knowing where a man could make a stand and where he would be cut down. If I could lead them away from the cabin, draw them into terrain that favored me. Stay here, I told Clara. Bar the door and do not open it for anyone but me. If I do not return by nightfall, no. The word was sharp and final. I looked at her, and I saw the fear in her eyes, but I saw something else too. I saw the same fierce defiance I had glimpsed on the first morning, the same refusal to be helpless, the same iron will that had allowed her to survive 3 years of torment and 6 weeks of flight. I will not hide while you die for me, she said. That is not who I am. That is not who I will ever be again. Clara, I can shoot. My father taught me before the drink took him. I can reload as fast as any man, and I do not miss what I aim at. She met my eyes, and her gaze was steady as the mountain itself. If they want me, they will have to go through both of us. And I would rather die fighting beside you than live knowing you died alone because I was too afraid to stand. Something cracked open inside my chest. Not broke, cracked open, like a seed breaking through its shell to reach for the sun. I love you, I said. The words came out before I could stop them, before I could weigh the consequences, before I could protect myself or her from what they might mean. They simply erupted, carried on the wave of something too powerful to contain any longer. Clara went very still. I watched her face, waiting for the rejection, or waiting for the awkward deflection that would preserve our arrangement while acknowledging its limits. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped animal seeking escape. Say that again, she whispered. I love you. I have loved you for weeks now, though I tried not to. I love the way you laugh, and the way you argue, and the way you refuse to let me protect you when you can protect yourself. I love that you killed a man who deserved killing and feel no shame for it. I love that you are not afraid of me, even though any sensible person should be. I love you, Clara Whitfield, and I do not care if you feel the same. I just needed you to know before... She crossed the distance between us in 3 quick strides and pressed her mouth to mine. The kiss was fierce and desperate, and it tasted like tears. Hers or mine, I could not tell. When she finally pulled back, her pale eyes were bright with something I had never seen there before. Something that looked impossibly, miraculously, like joy. I love you too, she said. I have loved you since the night you told me I did right to kill him. I have loved you since I realized that a man who could have taken everything from me chose to ask instead. I love you, Josiah Brennan, and I am not going to lose you to 3 men with guns who do not understand what they are hunting. I kissed her again, harder this time, and when we broke apart, I was smiling, a sensation so unfamiliar that my face felt strange around it. Then we fight together, I said. Together, she agreed. We prepared through the afternoon, moving with the grim efficiency of soldiers before battle. I showed Clara the best positions on the ridge above the old mining road, where the rock formations created natural cover, and the setting sun would be in their eyes if they came from the east. She practiced loading and reloading until her movements were smooth and automatic, and I watched her with a mixture of pride and terror that made my chest ache. I did not want her in danger. Every instinct I possessed screamed at me to lock her in the root cellar, to face these men alone, to keep her safe at any cost. But I had learned something about Clara in our months together. She was not a woman who could be kept safe against her will. She was a survivor, a fighter, and she had earned the right to face her demons on her own terms. All I could do was stand beside her and make sure those demons died trying. They came just before sunset. There were 3 of them, as Clara had said, hard men on tired horses, their faces shadowed beneath wide-brimmed hats, their rifles already in their hands. The leader was a big man, though not as big as me, with a scar that twisted the left side of his face into a permanent sneer. He carried a shotgun across his saddle, and his eyes swept the ridge with the practiced wariness of someone who had survived many hunts. "Brennan!" he called out. His voice echoed off the rocks, bouncing around the canyon like a challenge. "We know you are up there. We know you have the woman. We do not want trouble with you, friend. Just hand her over, and we will be on our way." I said nothing. Let them come closer. Let the sun sink a little lower. $500 is a lot of money, the man continued. But there is no reason we cannot share it. You give us the girl. We give you 100, and nobody has to get hurt. That is a fair deal, is it not? Still, I said nothing. They were 50 yards away now, close enough that I could see the nervous twitching of the younger men's hands, the way their eyes darted toward the shadows between the rocks. "Last chance, Brennan. We have heard the stories about you. We know you are some kind of giant, some kind of bear. But there are 3 of us and 1 of you, and those are odds I will take any day of the—" I shot him out of the saddle. The crack of the rifle split the evening air, and the scarred man toppled backward off his horse, a red flower blooming in the center of his chest. His horse screamed and bolted, and in the chaos that followed, Clara fired from her position and caught one of the younger men in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending his rifle flying into the snow. The 3rd man had more sense than his companions. He threw himself off his horse and rolled behind a fallen log, already returning fire. Bullets whined off the rocks around me, but I had chosen my position well. He could not hit me without exposing himself, and every time he tried to shift position, I put a round close enough to make him duck again. The wounded man was screaming, clutching his shoulder, trying to crawl toward cover. Clara shot again, this time striking the log near his head, and he stopped moving entirely, hands raised in surrender. "Please," he begged. "Please, I give up. I did not want to do this. They said it would be easy money. They said—" "Throw your weapon away," Clara called. Her voice was steady as stone. "Throw it away and lie flat with your hands behind your head." He complied, sobbing. That left the 3rd man, still pinned behind his log. I waited, patient as the mountain itself. Sooner or later he would have to move. Sooner or later the cold would get into his bones, or his nerve would break, or simple desperation would force him to act. I could wait forever. I had spent 7 years learning how to wait. It took less than 10 minutes. He broke cover with a wild yell, his pistol blazing in both hands, and I shot him twice in the chest before he had taken 3 steps. He fell like a puppet with cut strings and did not move again. Silence descended on the canyon. The horses had bolted, the echoes of gunfire had faded, and all that remained was the wounded man whimpering in the snow and the 2 bodies cooling in the dying light. I rose from my position and walked down the slope, my rifle at the ready. Clara emerged from behind her boulder and followed, her face pale but composed. We met at the edge of the battlefield, for that is what it was, a battlefield, and stood looking down at the carnage we had wrought. "It is not over," Clara said quietly. "His family will send more. There will always be more, as long as that bounty exists." I knew she was right. $500 was a fortune in these parts. It would attract every desperate man with a gun and a need for money. We could not fight them all. Sooner or later we would run out of ammunition or luck or the simple strength to keep pulling triggers. But I had not survived 7 years alone in these mountains by accepting the inevitable. "Then we changed the game," I said. "His father is a judge, you said?" "Yes, In Boise. And the bounty is for you, dead or alive. That is right. I turned to look at her, and something was forming in my mind, a plan so audacious that it might just work. Then Clara Whitfield needs to die, I said. And she needs to stay dead long enough for a different woman to emerge. A woman with a new name, a new history, a new life. A woman who is the wife of Josiah Brennan, respectable mine owner and citizen of Stanley, Idaho Territory. Clara's eyes widened as she understood what I was suggesting. Fake my death. Marry you. Start over. Can you think of a better plan? She was quiet for a long moment, her gaze moving from me to the bodies on the ground to the vast white wilderness that surrounded us. When she looked back at me, there was something new in her expression, something that looked like hope. What about him? She nodded toward the wounded man, still whimpering in the snow. I walked over to where he lay and crouched beside him. He was young, barely out of his teens, and terror had bleached his face to the color of the snow beneath him. He stared up at me with eyes that expected death. What is your name, boy? Tom Avery. Well, Tom Avery, you have a choice to make. You can die here on this mountain, and no one will ever find your body. Or you can go back down to Stanley with a story to tell. You can tell them that you found Clara Whitfield in the snow, frozen solid, dead from exposure. You can tell them you saw her body with your own eyes, that there is no doubt that the bounty is fulfilled. And in exchange for that story, I will let you live. I will even give you $100 of my own money to make the telling worthwhile. He stared at me, trying to understand. You want me to lie? I want you to do exactly what you came up here to do. Claim that Clara Whitfield is dead. The only difference is that you will be lying about seeing her body instead of delivering it. Do we have a deal? He nodded frantically. Yes. Yes. Whatever you say. Please do not kill me. I looked at his shoulder, at the wound Clara's bullet had carved through the meat of his arm. He would carry that scar for the rest of his life, but he would live. That was more mercy than he deserved, but I was feeling generous. We will patch you up and set you on one of the horses in the morning. You will ride down to Stanley and tell your story, and if I ever see you on this mountain again, or if I ever hear that you have told anyone the truth about what happened here, I will find you. I will find you wherever you hide. And what I do to you will make you wish I had killed you today. Do you understand? He understood. They always did. We buried the bodies that night, in shallow graves that the spring thaw would reveal as nothing more than anonymous bones. We burned their belongings, scattered their horses, erased every trace of their passage except for Tom Avery himself, who lay in my cabin with his arm bandaged and his eyes fixed on the ceiling, counting the hours until he could leave this nightmare behind. In the morning, we put him on a horse and watched him ride down the mountain towards Stanley. He did not look back. That afternoon, I walked into town myself, the first time I had willingly entered that place in nearly 2 years, and I asked to speak with the preacher. His name was Ezekiel Crane, and he had come to Stanley 5 years ago to save the souls of miners and prospectors who had little interest in salvation. He was a small man with kind eyes and a voice that could fill a church or a canyon with equal authority, and he looked at me with undisguised surprise when I appeared at his door. Mr. Brennan, I confess I never expected to see you here. I need you to perform a marriage, I said. Today, if possible. His eyebrows climbed toward his receding hairline. A marriage? To whom? Her name is Sarah Cole. She is a widow from Oregon, and she has been living on my claim through the winter. I intend to make her my wife. It was a thin story, full of gaps, but Ezekiel Crane was a practical man. He knew better than to ask too many questions of someone my size, and he could see in my face that I was not in the mood for detailed explanations. Very well. Bring the lady to the church at sunset, and I will marry you." And so, on a March evening in the year of our Lord 1903, Clara Whitfield died in the eyes of the law, and Sarah Brennan was born. She stood beside me at the altar in a dress we had salvaged from my wife's trunk, a simple blue calico that fit her like it had been made for her. And she spoke her vows in a clear, strong voice that did not waver. I spoke mine in return, my voice rough with emotion I could not hide, and when the preacher pronounced us man and wife, I kissed her as if the world depended on it. Perhaps it did. That night, back in our cabin, we sat by the fire and talked about the future. It was strange to speak of the future. For so long I had lived only in the present, one day bleeding into the next without plan or purpose. Clara, Sarah. I reminded myself, she was Sarah now, had changed that. She had given me something to hope for, something to build toward. "I want children," she said quietly, staring into the flames. "I never thought I would want them. My marriage to Edmund..." She rarely spoke his name, and when she did, it was with a careful blankness that told me more than any amount of emotion could have. Taught me to fear motherhood. I was terrified of bringing a child into that house, terrified of what he would do to them, terrified of what they would witness him doing to me. But with you... She turned to look at me, and her eyes were soft with something that made my heart ache. "With you, I am not afraid." I reached for her hand, enveloping it in both of mine. "I want children, too. I wanted them with my first wife, but she..." I stopped, the old grief rising in my throat. She was never strong enough. The doctor said the mountain winters were too harsh, that her constitution could not withstand them. She died before we could try. "I am sorry," Sarah said. "I am sorry for what you lost. I'm sorry too, but I think..." I paused, searching for the right words. "I think perhaps she sent you to me. I think perhaps she wanted me to be happy again, even if I could not be happy with her." Sarah smiled at that, a smile that held both sadness and hope. "Then we will honor her memory by being happy, by building the life she wanted you to have." We sat in silence for a while, holding hands and watching the fire, and I felt something settle inside me. Something that had been restless and unsettled for 7 years finally found its place. The following months were a whirlwind of activity. We expanded the cabin, adding a second room that would serve as a bedroom, freeing the main room to be a proper living space. I built furniture, a real table with real chairs, a dresser for Sarah's clothes, a cradle that I carved from a single piece of pine during the long summer evenings. Sarah planted a garden, coaxing vegetables from the rocky soil with a determination that bordered on stubbornness. She ordered books from Portland, textbooks mostly, along with primers and readers, and began planning for the school she intended to establish. "The children of these mountains deserve to learn," she told me. "They deserve the same chances I had before my father sold them away. I will give them that, Josiah. I will give them the future I was denied." I believed her. I had learned not to underestimate Sarah Brennan. The town of Stanley began to accept us, slowly at first, and then with increasing warmth. The story we had told, that Sarah was a widow from Oregon, that she had been stranded on my claim by the winter storms, was accepted without question. No one wanted to think too hard about the private lives of the Bear of Brennan Ridge, and Sarah's quiet competence and genuine kindness won over even the most suspicious housewives. By autumn, she was teaching classes in the back room of the general store. A dozen children gathered around her as she explained the mysteries of arithmetic and grammar. I would pick her up at the end of each day, walking into town with my massive stride, and the children would scatter before me like leaves before a wind. But they were laughing now, not screaming. They had learned that the bear was gentle, that his enormous hands could whittle toys and tickle bellies and wipe away tears. It was, I realized with a start, the first time in my adult life that children had not been afraid of me. "You have changed," Sarah said one evening as we walked home through the golden light of late afternoon. "You are not the man I met in that cabin last winter." "I'm exactly the man you met," I said. "I have just remembered who I was before grief made me forget." She squeezed my hand. "I love who you were, but I love who you are even more." The snows melted. The passes opened. Word came up from Boise that the bounty on Clara Whitfield had been withdrawn, following credible reports of her death in the Idaho wilderness. Tom Avery, it seemed, had kept his bargain. The judge who had put the price on her head had other concerns now: political enemies, financial troubles, a scandal involving his surviving son that occupied the attention of every newspaper in the territory. Clara Whitfield faded into history, just another name on the long list of women who had disappeared into the western frontier. Sarah Brennan, on the other hand, became a fixture in Stanley and the surrounding valleys. She was the wife of the bear, the woman who had tamed the monster of Brennan Ridge, and the community regarded her with a mixture of awe and affection. She taught the children of the mining families to read, using books she ordered from Portland with money from my silver claims. She organized the women of the town into a mutual aid society that helped families through hard times and sickness. She stood at my side at church every Sunday, her hand in mine, and she smiled at the neighbors who had once crossed the street to avoid me. I changed too. I cannot say I became a friendly man. My nature was too set in its ways for that, but I became something close to civil. I no longer frightened children when I walked through town. I no longer made women clutch their skirts and hurry past. I was still the bear, still the giant, still the man who had defended his claim with blood. But I was also Sarah Brennan's husband, and that seemed to make all the difference. We were happy. That is the simple truth of it. We were two broken people who had found in each other the missing pieces of ourselves, and we were happy in a way that neither of us had ever expected to be. The first time Sarah told me she was with child, I wept. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I stood in our cabin, larger now, expanded by my own hands to accommodate the life we were building, and I wept like a child myself. Great heaving sobs that shook my massive frame and left me gasping for air. Sarah held me through it, her small hands stroking my hair, her voice murmuring comfort in my ear. I thought I was done, I managed to say when I could speak again. I thought that part of my life was over. I thought, "I know," she said. "I know. But it is not over. It is only beginning." Our daughter was born the following December, in the middle of a blizzard that reminded me painfully of the storm that had brought Sarah to my door 2 years before. I delivered her myself. I had no choice. The midwife could not make it through the drifts. And when I held her for the first time, I understood what love truly meant. She was tiny, impossibly tiny, with her mother's pale green eyes and my dark hair. She screamed with a fury that would have done credit to a creature 10 times her size, and I laughed through my tears and whispered her name for the first time. Ruth. Ruth Elizabeth Brennan. Welcome to the world, little one. I remember the terror of those first weeks, the fear that I would hold her too tightly and crush her, or too loosely and drop her. My hands, which had wielded pickaxes and rifles and had taken the lives of men, trembled every time I cradled her. She seemed so fragile, so impossibly delicate, and I so impossibly large and clumsy. "You will not break her," Sarah told me, laughing at my expression of concentrated panic. "She is stronger than she looks, just like her mother. She is perfect," I said, unable to take my eyes off the tiny creature in my arms. "She is absolutely perfect. She has your nose. God help her." Sarah laughed again and leaned against my shoulder. "I love your nose. It is a very distinguished nose." It has been broken 3 times, which only adds to its character. We stayed there through the night, the 3 of us, while the storm raged outside and the fire crackled in the hearth, and I knew a peace I had thought was lost to me forever. The cabin that had once been my prison, my fortress of solitude, had become a home. The man who had called himself the Bear had become a father, and the woman who had stumbled through a blizzard half dead from hunger had become the center of my universe. Ruth grew quickly, as children do, and she filled our cabin with laughter and chaos and more love than I had thought possible. She took her first steps toward me, arms outstretched, and I caught her and swung her into the air while she shrieked with delight. She said her first word, "Papa," and I am not ashamed to admit I wept. And her second word, "Mama," and her third word, which was snow, because she was a mountain child through and through. Sarah taught her to read before she was 5, using the same primers she used with her students in town. Ruth proved to be a quick study, devouring books with the same fierce appetite her mother had for knowledge. She would sit by the fire in the evenings, sounding out words with a concentration that reminded me painfully of Sarah during our first winter together. "She has your mind," I told Sarah one evening, watching Ruth struggle through a particularly difficult passage. "And your stubbornness," Sarah replied. "Heaven help anyone who tries to stop her from getting what she wants." 2 years later, our son arrived, a great strapping boy with lungs that could wake the dead and an appetite that kept his mother busy from dawn to dusk. We named him Daniel, after my father, and he grew into his inheritance with a speed that sometimes alarmed me. By the time he was 5, he was already showing signs of the size that had made me an object of fear and fascination my whole life. "He will be a giant, like his father," Sarah said one evening, watching him play by the fire. "The other children will be afraid of him." "Then we will teach him to be gentle," I said. "We will teach him that strength without kindness is just brutality, and that the measure of a man is not how much fear he can inspire, but how much love he can give." She smiled at that and leaned her head against my shoulder. "You have become quite the philosopher in your old age, Josiah Brennan." I had a good teacher. We watched our children grow, Sarah and I, and we watched our love grow with them. What had begun as a desperate bargain between 2 starving souls had become something far greater, a partnership, a friendship, a passion that time only deepened. I never tired of looking at her. I never tired of hearing her voice. I never tired of holding her in my arms at night and thanking whatever God might be listening for the blizzard that had brought her stumbling onto my land. 20 years passed. Ruth grew into a beautiful young woman who inherited her mother's fierce spirit and her father's stubborn determination. She fell in love with a young surveyor from Boise, a good man with kind eyes and steady hands, and I walked her down the aisle of the church in Stanley with tears streaming down my weathered face. Daniel became a doctor, of all things, using the size and strength he had inherited from me to help rather than to harm. He traveled back east for his training and returned to Idaho to serve the mining communities that had always been too poor to attract medical attention. Our grandchildren came, 4 of them, each more precious than the last, and the cabin on Brennan Ridge became a place of laughter and chaos and love. The man who had once been called the Bear, who had spent 7 years in bitter solitude, who had thought himself incapable of human connection, became Grandpa Josiah, a silver-haired giant who told stories by the fire and carved wooden toys with hands that had once known only violence. And through it all, Sarah was there, my wife, my love, my salvation. She grew gray, as I did. She grew slower, as I did. The years settled on her like snow on the mountains, softening her edges, but never dimming the fire in her pale green eyes. We buried old friends and welcomed new neighbors, and watched the world change around us in ways neither of us had ever imagined. The territory became a state. The silver ran out. The town of Stanley shrank and nearly died, and then found new life as a destination for wealthy Easterners who wanted to experience the Wild West. We laughed at that, Sarah and I. We had experienced the Wild West, and there had been nothing romantic about it. There had been hunger and cold and violence and death. There had been desperate bargains made in isolated cabins. There had been love that grew from necessity and blossomed into something eternal. The last time I held her, she was 71 years old and still the most beautiful woman I had ever seen. It was a spring evening, and we were sitting on the porch of our cabin, watching the sun set over the Sawtooth Mountains. The peaks were still capped with snow, glowing pink and gold in the dying light, and the air smelled of pine and wildflowers and the promise of renewal. "Do you remember?" Sarah said softly. "The first thing you ever said to me?" I thought back across the decades, to a desperate young woman lying in my bed, to a giant who had forgotten how to feel. "I asked if you were hungry," I said. She laughed, that same bright, genuine sound that had broken me open all those years ago. "And I told you I had been hungry for 6 weeks, that I could not remember what it felt like not to be hungry. I remember." "I am not hungry anymore, Josiah." She reached over and took my hand, her fingers lacing through mine as they had done 1,000 times before. "You filled me up. You gave me everything I needed and so much more. You saved me." "You saved me too," I said. "You saved me from becoming something I did not want to be. You taught me that I could be good again. You taught me that I could love." She smiled, and even now, even after all these years, that smile could make my heart skip like a young man's. "I love you," she said. "I have loved you since the night you told me I did right to kill him. I have loved you every day since, and I will love you for whatever days remain." I brought her hand to my lips and kissed it, tasting the familiar warmth of her skin. "I love you too," I said. "I love you more than I have words to say. I love you more than this mountain loves the snow, more than the river loves the sea, more than—" "Hush." She pressed a finger to my lips, the same gesture she had used on our first night together. "You never were a man of words, Josiah Brennan, but you have always been a man of action. Show me." I stood and lifted her into my arms, more carefully now than I had in our youth, but with no less devotion, and I carried her inside our cabin to the bed where we had learned each other, where we had made children and memories and a life. And I showed her. That is my story. The story of how I found salvation in the arms of a woman I should have sent away, and how her hunger became the feast that saved us both. The story of how 2 desperate people made a desperate bargain and found, in the keeping of it, something far more precious than either of us had dared to hope. If you have ever been hungry, truly hungry, whether for food or for love or for simple human connection, then perhaps you understand. Perhaps you know what it means to find someone who can fill that emptiness, who can turn survival into living, who can transform a lonely giant into a man worth loving. I was that giant once. I was the bear of Brennan Ridge, the monster of the mountains, the man who had forgotten how to feel. And then a woman stumbled through a blizzard and collapsed in my snow, and everything changed. Everything changed. And if my story has stayed with you, if you felt the cold of that first winter, if you shared the warmth of those nights by the fire, if you cheered when the bounty hunters fell and wept when our children were born, then I ask only this: believe in the possibility of redemption. Believe that even the most broken among us can be made whole. Believe that love, real love, the kind that grows from necessity and deepens into eternity, is worth every sacrifice, every risk, every terrifying moment of vulnerability. Believe, as I believe, that 2 starving souls can feed each other, and that hunger, in the end, can lead to the greatest feast of all.